Elizabeth Thompson adjusted her black blazer as she observed New York City through the window of her 20th floor office. Below, the city pulsed in its usual frenetic rhythm, but from that height, everything seemed small and distant, just like the problem she had been trying for years to sweep under the rug of her conscience. Her cell phone vibrated once again. It was the 5th message from Robert that morning. She hesitated for a moment before reading, "We need to talk. Hannah is suspicious, but I can't lose you." A heavy sigh escaped her lips. How many times had she heard those same words? How long had she been living in this endless cycle of empty promises? "Elizabeth." The voice of Sarah, her assistant and best friend, interrupted her thoughts. "The shareholders' meeting starts in 5 minutes." "I'm coming," she replied, putting the phone in her purse. Once again, work demands would serve as an excuse to postpone that inevitable conversation. In the meeting room, Elizabeth conducted the presentation with the competence everyone expected from her. Numbers, graphs, projections, everything flowed, with the precision of a well-rehearsed symphony. It was there in command that she truly felt in control. "Excellent presentation, Elizabeth," commented one of the directors after the meeting. "Tonight's cocktail party will be the icing on the cake. All major clients have confirmed their attendance." She forced a smile. The event would be another one of those occasions where she would need to keep up appearances, pretend that her life was as perfect as her career. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked when they were alone. "You seem distant today." Elizabeth hesitated. Sarah was the only person who knew the whole truth about her relationship with Robert, but even with her lately, Elizabeth had difficulty opening up completely. "Is it Robert again?" Sarah didn't need to wait for the answer. "Liz, you need to put an end to this. It's been 5 years." I know," Elizabeth interrupted, running her hands over her face. "But it's not that simple." "Simple?" Sarah laughed humorlessly. "No, it's not simple. But necessary, absolutely. You deserve more than crumbs of attention than empty promises." Sarah's words hit Elizabeth like a punch to the stomach. Deep down, she knew her friend was right. But there was something inside her, a deep and irrational fear that prevented her from taking that definitive step. In the afternoon, as she prepared for the cocktail party, Elizabeth received another message from Robert. "I'll be at the event. Tonight." Hannah had a last-minute commitment. Her heart raced, a mixture of anxiety and guilt that was already familiar to her. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror of the company, adjusting the red dress she had chosen especially for the occasion. Who was that woman staring back at her? When had she lost so much of herself? The cocktail party went as expected. Elizabeth circulated among the guests with her usual ease, exchanging smiles and pleasantries. But her gaze occasionally met Robert's, across the room, and that old electricity was still there even after so long. "We really need to talk," he whispered, when he managed a moment alone with her. "Things are different now, I promise." Elizabeth felt the familiar tightness in her chest. How many times had she heard those same words? How many times had she allowed herself to believe them? "I'll think about it," she replied dryly, moving away before anyone noticed the closeness between them. It was past midnight when the event finally ended. Elizabeth felt exhausted, not just physically, but especially emotionally. "Come on, I'll give you a ride," Sarah offered, noticing her friend's state. "You're in no condition to drive." In the car, as they cut through the now emptier streets of New York City, a heavy silence hung between them. Elizabeth looked out the window, watching. The city lights passed like blurs when Sarah finally broke the silence. "You know what worries me the most? Seeing you losing yourself more and more in this story. The Elizabeth I knew, determined, full of dreams. Where is she?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Elizabeth closed her eyes, feeling the weight of that truth. Where was that Elizabeth? At what point had she allowed her life to turn into that tangle of lies and half-truths? The sound of a horn cut through her thoughts. Everything happened very quickly. The blinding lights, Sarah's scream, the deafening sound of twisting metal. Elizabeth's last thought before everything went dark was a desperate prayer. "God, forgive me." The first sensation was of lightness, as if all the weight of the world had been removed from her shoulders. Elizabeth opened her eyes slowly, expecting to feel pain, but there was no pain at all. In fact, there was no physical sensation of any kind. That's when she saw it. Her own body. Sprawled on the asphalt, the red dress now stained with a darker, more sinister shade. Next to it, Sarah's car was unrecognizable, twisted against a pole. People were starting to gather around, some with cell phones in their hands, others shouting, "For help! No, no, no!" Elizabeth tried to approach her body, but her feet didn't touch the ground. It was as if she were floating a few inches above the asphalt. "Sarah! Someone help Sarah!" But no one could hear her. Her words were like wind, passing unnoticed by the ears of those present. Elizabeth watched, helpless, as the paramedics arrived, and began emergency procedures. "Weak pulse, but she's still alive," shouted one of the rescuers working on her body. "We need to stabilize her before moving." Elizabeth floated over the scene, an involuntary spectator of her own tragedy. She saw when they removed Sarah from the car, also unconscious but alive. The sirens, the lights, the voices, everything seemed distant, as if watching a movie through a foggy glass. That's when she felt it, a gentle but insistent force pulling her upward. She tried to resist, wanting to stay close to her body, close to Sarah, but the force intensified. The world around her began to dissolve, the colors mixing, like in a wet watercolor. The darkness gave way to a light, first faint, then increasingly intense. It wasn't a light that hurt the eyes. In fact, it was comforting, welcoming. Elizabeth found herself enveloped by it, as if immersed in an ocean of clarity. And then, he was there. There was no defined form, but Elizabeth knew with a certainty that transcended any earthly logic, that she was in the presence of Jesus. Not the Jesus of paintings or statues, but a presence so real and so overwhelming that it made her being, or whatever was left of her at that moment, tremble. In his presence, her entire life unfolded like a movie. Every choice, every lie, every moment when she had preferred the easier path instead of the right path. The relationship with Robert revealed itself in its true nature, not a great, forbidden love, as she tried to convince herself, but an escape, a way to avoid facing her deepest fears. She saw the suffering she had caused, to Hannah, Robert's wife, who, even though suspicious, never had concrete proof, to her parents, who didn't understand why she was closing herself off more and more, to Sarah, who carried the weight of keeping her secrets, and especially to herself, burying her true dreams and values under layers of empty justifications. Elizabeth expected to feel shame, guilt, fear. But what she felt was something completely different, an unconditional love so pure and so complete that tears, if they were tears in that ethereal form, began to flow. Why, was all she managed to ask, her voice echoing in dimensions she didn't understand. The answer didn't come in words, but in sensations, in truths that revealed themselves in her being. She saw that every moment of her life, even the mistakes, had a purpose. That it wasn't too late to change, to start over. A choice presented itself before her. She could continue on the path she had chosen until now, or she could accept a new life, a new story. It wouldn't be easy. True change never is, but it would be real. It would be meaningful. Before she could express her decision, she felt herself being pulled back. The light began to dim, and a sensation of weight gradually returned. Distant sounds began to become clearer. Beeps of machines, muffled voices, the characteristic noise of a hospital. "Pressure stabilizing," she heard someone say. "I think she's coming back." Elizabeth wanted to scream, wanted to say that she wasn't ready yet, that she needed more time in that divine presence. But her physical body was reclaiming her consciousness, and the last thing she felt, before plunging completely back into reality, was a deep certainty. Nothing would be the same. The return to consciousness was gradual, like emerging from the depths of an ocean. First it was the sounds, the constant beep of heart monitors, the distant murmur of voices in the corridors, the soft hum of the air conditioning. Then came the physical sensations, the rigidity of the hospital mattress, the discomfort of the IV needle in her arm, the throbbing pain that seemed to emanate from every inch of her body. Elizabeth opened her eyes slowly, blinking several times to adjust to the fluorescent light of the room. A middle-aged nurse with a gentle smile on her face was adjusting something on one of the machines. "Welcome back," said the nurse, noticing that Elizabeth had awakened. "I'm Rose. You're at St. Luke's Hospital. You had an accident, but you're safe now." Elizabeth tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Rose offered her some ice cubes, which she gratefully sucked on. Sarah," she managed to whisper after a moment. Rose's smile faltered slightly. "Your friend is stable but still in a coma. The doctors are doing everything they can." Guilt hit Elizabeth like a wave, making her heart race enough for the monitors to register the change. Flashes of the accident began to come back. The blinding lights, the impact, and then I saw, Elizabeth began but stopped. How to explain something that even she didn't fully understand? "Rest now," Rose said softly, adjusting the pillow. "Your family is on the way." The following hours were a blur of exams, medical visits, and tears from her parents. Her mother, always so controlled, sobbed openly while holding her hand. Her father, a man of few words, just stood by her side, his face marked by deep concern. "It was a miracle you survived," the doctor explained during the visit. "The impact was severe. You had several fractures and internal bleeding, but we managed to stabilize everything. You'll need physical therapy, but you should recover completely." Elizabeth listened to everything as if she were in a dream. Her concerns were not with the fractures or physical recovery. Her mind was fixed on the experience she had during the time she was unconscious. The light, the divine presence, the unconditional love she felt. It all seemed so real, so vivid. "Doctor," she called as he was leaving the room, Is it normal to have experiences during the time you're unconscious?" The doctor adjusted his glasses, his face assuming a professional expression. "Some people report experiences during near-death states, yes. The brain under extreme stress can produce various sensations." "They weren't just sensations," Elizabeth interrupted, feeling an urgency to make someone understand. "It was real. I felt—" "Elizabeth, dear," her mother intervened, exchanging a worried look with the doctor. "You've been through a very big trauma. You need to rest." But how to rest when her soul seemed to be on fire? How to return to normal when she had experienced something that completely transformed her understanding of reality? At night, when she was finally alone in the room, Elizabeth allowed the tears to flow freely. They weren't just tears of physical pain or worry about Sarah. They were tears of transformation, of recognition of a truth she could no longer deny. That's when Rose, the nurse, silently entered the room to check her vital signs. "Can't sleep?" she asked gently, noticing the tears on Elizabeth's face. "How can I sleep? My friend is in a coma because of me, and I—" Elizabeth hesitated. "Rose, do you believe in spiritual experiences?" The nurse stopped what she was doing and sat on the edge of the bed. "I've been working in this hospital for 20 years, dear. I've seen things that science can't explain. Why?" Elizabeth began to tell her experience. The light, the divine presence, the revelation of her wrong choices. To her surprise, Rose listened attentively without judgment. "You know," Rose said after a moment, "sometimes God allows us to go through extreme situations to show us what really matters." Before leaving, Rose left something on the bedside table, a small Bible with a blue cover. "Maybe this will help you find some answers." The days in the hospital dragged on slowly. Elizabeth alternated between painful physical therapy sessions and moments of deep reflection. The Bible that Rose had given her became her constant companion, even though she still struggled to understand much of what she read. It was during one of these reading afternoons that Robert appeared in her room. He was impeccably dressed as always, but there was something different about his demeanor. "My God, Elizabeth," he approached the bed, trying to hold her hand. "When I heard about the accident—" Elizabeth withdrew her hand, surprising herself with the ease of the gesture. "So, please don't." "But Liz, I was desperate. I couldn't come before because Hannah—" "Stop, Robert," Elizabeth interrupted him. her voice firm despite the fatigue. "Don't you understand? All of this, everything we lived, was a mistake. A mistake that almost cost my life and could still cost the life of my best friend." Robert looked at her confused. "You're altered by the accident, by the medications. When you recover—" "For the first time in years, I'm seeing things clearly," Elizabeth said, holding the Bible against her chest. "What we had wasn't love, Robert. It was selfishness, it was escape, it was— You found religion now." He laughed nervously, pointing to the book in her hands. "Is that it? An accident and suddenly you've become a saint?" "No, I haven't become a saint, but I had an experience that changed everything. And I won't go back." Robert's face hardened. "You're going to throw away 5 years because of a post-traumatic delusion?" "I'm choosing not to throw away the rest of my life by continuing with something I know is wrong," Elizabeth replied, feeling a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Please leave and don't come back." After 3 weeks in the hospital, Elizabeth was finally discharged. Her fractures were healing well, although she still needed crutches to move around. But her biggest concern remained Sarah, who was still in a coma. Every day Elizabeth visited her friend in the ICU. She would sit by her bed, read passages from the Bible, and talk to her, even without knowing if Sarah could hear her. Know what's most ironic?" Elizabeth said one day, holding her friend's inert hand. "You always tried to show me the right path, and I never wanted to listen. I needed to almost die to understand." It was during one of these visits that Elizabeth met Danielle, a young woman visiting her mother, who was hospitalized on the same floor. The two began to talk in the waiting room, and Danielle ended up confiding about her complicated relationship with a married man. "He says he's going to leave his wife, that he just needs the right moment," Danielle explained, wiping away tears. Elizabeth felt as if she were looking at a mirror of her past. "Danielle, can I tell you a story?" In the next 2 hours, Elizabeth shared her experience, the relationship with Robert, the accident, the near-death experience, and her transformation. To her surprise, Danielle listened attentively, asking questions and reflecting on her own situation. "How did you manage to end it?" Danielle asked finally. "Don't you miss it?" "Of course I miss it," Elizabeth answered honestly, "but I miss the illusion I had created, not the reality of what it was. And the peace I feel now, since it's worth much more than any moment of false happiness I had before." The sound of the heart monitors changed subtly, alerting Elizabeth that something was different. She was on her daily visit to Sarah when she noticed that her friend's fingers had moved slightly. "Nurse," Elizabeth called, her heart racing. "I think she's waking up." The medical team arrived quickly, and in the following minutes, to everyone's joy and amazement, Sarah began to wake from the coma. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking several times to adjust to the light. "Liz?" Her voice was just a hoarse whisper. "I'm here." Elizabeth held her hand, tears flowing freely. "Thank God you're back." After the doctors did all the necessary exams and confirmed that Sarah was stable, the two friends finally had a moment alone. "Liz," Sarah began, her voice still weak but clearer, "you won't believe what I saw." Elizabeth felt her heart stop for a moment. "What did you see, Sarah?" "It was all light. There was this presence, so much love." Sarah stopped, frustrated at not being able to find the right words. "You'll think I'm crazy." "No, I won't," Elizabeth replied, squeezing her friend's hand. "Because I saw it too." The two looked at each other in silence for a long moment, a deep understanding passing between them. They were no longer just friends who shared secrets and daily problems. Now they shared something much deeper, an experience that had transformed their souls. In the days following Sarah's awakening, the two friends spent hours sharing details of their spiritual experiences. It was surprising how their visions complemented each other, like pieces of a divine puzzle. "It's incredible," Sarah commented during one of their conversations. "When I was there, in that presence, I saw so many lost women, Elizabeth. So many souls needing direction, true love." "I saw that too," Elizabeth replied, reaching for her laptop. And that's why I started this project. I want to show you something. Elizabeth shared her plans for the support center. As she explained each detail, Sarah's eyes grew brighter and brighter. Beth, this is exactly what I was thinking. Sarah adjusted herself in the hospital bed, excited despite her fatigue. But you know what could make this even more complete? A mentorship program. What do you mean? Just think. Women who have already gone through destructive relationships and found healing like you could accompany others who are still in the process, not just with advice, but with real presence, practical support. Ideas began to flow, between them like in the old days, but now with a much greater purpose. Sarah, with her experience in human resources, began to structure the mentorship program, while Elizabeth refined the overall project. Rose, who continued to visit the two even outside her working hours, brought a valuable suggestion. You need to meet Pastor Deborah. She does incredible work with women in vulnerable situations. Pastor Deborah was a woman in her 60s, with a welcoming smile and eyes that seemed to see into the soul. After listening to Elizabeth and Sarah's stories and plans, she remained silent for a moment as if processing everything she had heard. You know, she finally began, I've been praying for a project like this for years. I have a space in the church that's practically ready, just needing some adaptations. If you want, it could be the center's headquarters. When Elizabeth returned to work, 3 months after the accident, her first action was to present a partnership proposal for the center to the board. To her surprise, the company not only approved the project, but also offered legal and administrative support for its structuring. This is different from what we expected from you, Elizabeth, one of the directors commented. I know, she replied with a serene smile, but sometimes we need a reality check to understand what really matters. It was a sunny Saturday when Elizabeth arrived at the center for another day of work. In the last 6 months, the project had grown beyond her expectations. Dozens of women had already been helped, and the mentorship program was proving to be a success. As she organized materials for the afternoon workshop, she heard a voice that made her heart skip a beat. Elizabeth? It was Helen, Robert's wife. Elizabeth felt her blood run cold. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind in a second. How had Helen found out about the center? What did she want? Can we talk? Helen asked, her voice surprisingly calm. Elizabeth nodded, leading her to her office. The silence between them was heavy, laden with years of unspoken hurt. Robert told me everything, Helen began, her hands trembling slightly. After your accident, he changed. He started drinking heavily, having crises of conscience. One day, he simply broke down and confessed your entire affair. Elizabeth felt tears forming in her eyes. Helen, Let me finish, please, Helen gently interrupted. I already knew. Maybe not all the details, but a wife always knows, and for years I blamed myself. I thought I wasn't good enough, that I had failed as a woman, as a wife. It wasn't your fault, Elizabeth said, her voice choked. I was selfish. I only thought about myself. I didn't come here for accusations, Helen continued. I came because I heard about this place, about the work you're doing, and I need help. I can't forgive, neither him nor myself, for allowing this to continue for so long. The two talked for hours. Helen shared her story, the years of suspicion, the destroyed self-esteem, the fear of being alone. Elizabeth listened, offering not justifications, but understanding and hope. A year after the accident, the support center was celebrating its first anniversary. The church hall was decorated with flowers and ribbons, and dozens of women, some still in the process of healing, others already mentors, gathered to celebrate. Elizabeth observed everything with a heart overflowing with gratitude. Sarah, now coordinator of the mentorship program, was conducting a dynamic with a group. Helen, who had become one of the most dedicated mentors, was helping to organize the buffet. Rose, who had retired from the hospital, coordinated the spiritual support program. Can you imagine if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be here? Danielle approached, smiling. That I'd be free, happy, helping other women? God really does work in mysterious ways, Elizabeth replied, hugging her friend. Pastor Deborah asked for attention, and a respectful silence fell over the hall. When Elizabeth and Sarah approached me with this project, I confess I was impressed by their vision. But what touched me the most was seeing how God can use our most painful experiences to create something beautiful. Elizabeth felt Sarah squeeze her hand. The two looked at each other, remembering that fateful night that had changed their lives forever. Every woman in this room has a story, the pastor continued. Stories of pain, of mistakes, of regret, but also stories of courage, of overcoming, of rebirth. Elizabeth looked around at the faces she had come to know so well over the past year. Each of them carried their own scars, but also a light. The same light she had experienced in that transcendental experience. The true miracle, the pastor concluded, is not just individual transformation. It's how that transformation multiplies, touching other lives, creating a network of love and healing that continues to grow. After the celebration, Elizabeth stayed a bit longer at the center. She sat alone in the welcoming room, that space that had witnessed so many tears, so many new beginnings. "Thank you," she whispered, knowing he was listening. She didn't need to say anything more. Her heart was overflowing with gratitude. Through the window, the sun was setting over New York, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. Elizabeth smiled, remembering how she used to view the city from her high-rise office, feeling so alone despite all her success. Now she understood. Her second chance hadn't been just for her. It had been a calling, a mission, and each day was a new opportunity to honor that gift, to transform her own story of redemption into hope for others. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Sarah. "Dinner at my place tonight? We have some more. Plans to discuss?" Elizabeth smiled. Yes, the journey continued, and she could hardly wait to see what other miracles God had in store for them.